see what the limits are?
Well, my original presupposition was to try to have no presupposition at all. And then out of that came all of these assumptions. You're right that nobody has trips exactly like mine. Although, if you question people carefully, you can begin to see how it works. For example, I described this thing this morning, the elves, the presentational thing, the high-speed motion, the gifts, all that. Well, sometimes people will take DMT and they will come back and you'll realize that it's as though there is an archetype there which has different levels in it. And if I had to say what the archetype of DMT is, it's the archetype of the circus. And one time I saw a woman come out of DMT. She was an anthropologist. She had fairly high body weight, and I could tell that she had not gotten a complete hit. Came down, we said, okay, what was it? She said, it was the saddest carnival in the world. She said the carnival was closed. All the tents had their flaps rolled down, and there were just paper cups and candy wrappers blowing in the aisles in between them, and the Ferris wheel was stopped. Well, she was just at the edge of this thing, and if you think about the archetype of the circus, it is an interesting one. First of all, you have the three center rings where wild and zany activity is continuously being presented. Tiny cars keep arriving with 14 clowns in each one, and they keep climbing out, falling all over each other. But it isn't all fun and games. It has a strange erotic content, and as a child, I think my first awareness of what I would really call eros was watching this beautiful long-haired woman in a tiny spangled costume hang by her teeth 120 feet above the center ring, doing acrobatics. So you've got the clown, and you've got the lady in the tiny spangled costume, and then off from the center ring you have these dark alleyways where the sideshows are, the Siamese twins and the goat boy and all the rest of it, and it has a very weird vibe about it. So it can land you in any of these places, but if you try and correlate people's experiences, it seems to me that it's pretty clear that through their own life history and their own programming, nevertheless, something is trying to poke through. Now, my DMT experience seems pretty radically different from other people's, although other people don't give any account at all. I mean, it's amazing how inarticulate people are. They come down, you say, how was it? And they say, it was far out. You say, you don't get out of here with that rap. How was it? And you say, well, they can't give a good account. On psilocybin, I think most people experience something very much like what I describe. Huge machines, a sense of danger to the earth, apocalyptic visions, the idea that someone will come and help. And I'm pretty resistant to all the flotsam and jetsam of the New Age. I mean, I don't spend a moment worrying about the exact physical location of Atlantis or stuff like that. And I think it inflates their personal mythologies and intellectual misconceptions, but there is something trying to get through. That's why this exercise, show me what you are for yourself, is really a good one. And maybe my trips are so weird because I have always worshipped weirdness. So I can go further down that road without being alarmed while somebody else would pull back. One of the problems is that we don't have complete maps of these places. At this stage in exploring that new world, what we have essentially are the scribbled diaries of frightened explorers. And we don't know if Explorer A is talking about the same river system as Explorer B, or whether they were on opposite sides of the planet or the universe. Building a coherent picture of the psychedelic dimension would be the first challenge to a rational approach to understanding it.
Have you ever read Far Journeys by Robert Monroe?
Is that the first book?
No.
No, I read the first book.
Well, it actually is a map. Talk about weird. This is one of the weirdest things you would ever read. But it has an amazing ring of truth in it. And in it, he presents a map of all of the realms of beings that exist that he's visited as just normal consciousness. It's almost an anti-psychedelic description. But it's pretty consistent with some of the things you were discussing this morning. It's because this is where you go when you die. And it's also where you go when you sleep. In fact, he talks about classes you attend in your sleep. And he describes these levels upon levels of entities coexistence. And he describes it like a hidden canvas that just happens to be dropping in a business.
Well, I read the first book, and I was puzzled by how much of it didn't seem familiar to me. Like, I remember in the first book he talks about a world that's just like this world, except the cars are 9 feet wide. That would be a very puzzling psychedelic experience, to go to that world. I knew someone who was very close to him, and I don't want to set off any lawsuits here, but I once cornered this person and said, "So what about it?" And he said, "Don't worry, you don't have to worry, this is not getting close to your bailiwick at all." Buddhism of the Mahayanas has, a tremendously complex system of levels and entities, wrathful Buddhas and Dharmapalas and peaceful entities. And I think that that's pretty interesting as a phenomenological description of mind. I reject the philosophical premise of Buddhism because I think it's, an unbelievably uncompromising kind of nihilism. But Buddhism, as it's pitched in America, soft pedals that a lot. They don't present it as a form of nihilism, but I think ultimately it is, in the most positive sense. But still, I'm of the school that follows Alfred North Whitehead, who said, "Say what you may, there are certain stubborn facts." And, that's not a very Buddhist point of view. Yeah.
You have visions on cannabis, too?
If I can control myself and not do it too often. The problem is cannabis does so many other wonderful things, and I tend to use it for those other wonderful things. But if I were totally dedicated to vision, then I would only smoke once a week, because then you completely come to equilibrium. And then, I think people do it not wrong, but not the way you should do it if you want visions. You should do it the way you do all these other things, alone in silent darkness and at high doses. Bursts of hallucination on cannabis are hard to control and predict, but sometimes they're as intense as anything can be. If you read 19th century descriptions of cannabis use by people like Fitzhugh Ludlow and the Club du Hashashin and that crowd, where they were eating the hashish, it's very clear that it was the LSD of the 19th century. I mean, nobody can read those descriptions without realizing these people were loaded for sure. They were thoroughly and completely smashed to be able to write those kinds of accounts. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's interesting you said you'd smoke a lot at the start of the mushroom trip. When I smoke a lot at the start of the trip, it's tend to really confuse the entry, and then eventually I kind of realize, it has an effect which I mean, I'm not sure that's a good effect in terms of getting the learning, shall we say, from the more powerful chemicals.
Well, you didn't exactly make clear to me what the effect was. It fuzzes you out going
It
into?
depends on the smoke, I suppose. If you have, very top-grade sensimine, will do one thing. If you smoke Colombian, it'll do something totally different.
What it does to me is it just slightly cuts my anxiety. I'm able to let the thing unfold of its own. I don't know. I mean, I have a lifelong, intense relationship to cannabis, and I basically make my living out of being able to do feats of memory. And, cannabis is supposed to trash your memory. So I don't, maybe I'm different, but I resist any maybe I'm different argument because it's malarkey. Nobody's different enough that they can,
In terms of your